More than 1 million immigrants living legally in the United States could soon be deported if the Supreme Court rules in favor of what the Trump administration argued today. The immigrants were granted temporary protected status. You've probably heard this term before, TPS. They were granted this before President Trump took office. Now, Congress created TPS back in 1990 to protect immigrants from being deported to countries that are dealing with armed conflicts, natural disasters, or another extraordinary crisis. Well, President Trump has been highly critical of TPS for years, and when he took office, his then Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, canceled the TPS protections for people from Haiti and people from Syria. Well, now the Washington Post is reporting, take a look, that the conservative justices on the Supreme Court seemed sympathetic to the administration's arguments that it can cancel these TPS protections. I want to bring in Julian Mark, who helped report that story for the Post. He's joining us live now. Julian, thanks for your time, sir, for coming on the News 4 Rundown. I just want to start kind of broadly here. What are your takeaways from all of the arguments we heard today?
Well, I thought it was very interesting the way first of all, I saw a pretty sharp divide in when Solicitor General John Sauer was making the case for the Trump administration. A lot of the sharper questioning for him came from the liberal justices who essentially asked him about the claims of racism that the migrants are accusing the Trump administration of, particularly from President Donald Trump's previous comments about Haitians, being from, not a good country, coming and, poisoning the blood of the U.S. citizens. So I think there was a really big, sharp questioning from those justices on that front. And then also, they really challenged the Trump administration's assertion that Kristi Noem can or could, cancel protections without any review from the courts. And so there was a lot of sharp questioning there.
So let me ask you. On the other hand, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue, please.
On the other hand, I think when the lawyers for the immigrants, got up to speak, a lot of the more critical questioning came from the conservative justices who basically said, and I think this is important, they pointed out that the TPS law says courts cannot review the Homeland Secretary's decision. So, it says it pretty clearly. And so they were trying to test the immigrants' arguments that, heard the steps leading up to that could not be challenged. And so it was a little bit wonky. It's a little complicated and very deeply, in the law. But yeah.
So let me ask you, Kristi Noem, when she was Secretary of Homeland Security, she determined that Syrians and Haitians should return to their countries, even though the State Department advises American citizens not to travel to either of those countries because of risks of terrorism, kidnapping, armed conflict. If it's not safe for an American citizen to go, what's the Trump administration's latest argument then about sending Syrians and Haitians back?
Well, they say that, first of all, the State Department's advisories are meant for U.S. citizens, and that, it is sort of confined, that is the target audience of those advisories. And B, it says that she weighed the evidence that of what the State Department says in its advisories and basically found that, she still found that they should send Haitians and Syrians back to those countries.
Julian, let me ask you one more question. Is it true that the president has supported providing TPS protection for some immigrants?
I'm not entirely sure about that, but it is very clear that he has canceled protections for some and not for others. And there's no, for me, at least as I understand it, there's no sort of clear reasoning behind that. For instance, El Salvador, which has had TPS for, I think, going on, I think, a couple decades. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they have not canceled it for El Salvador. So I think these are questions that we should certainly be asking. But yes, I think generally the Trump administration has been pretty hostile towards TPS.
Washington Post Supreme Court reporter Julian Mark, thanks so much for joining us live on the News 4 Rundown. We appreciate it.